Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something really fundamental, I think, to how businesses work: ethics and social responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely core stuff.
You shared chapter 2 of Ebert and Griffin's Business Essentials with us, and our plan today is to really unpack that, not just recite definitions.
Right. We want to get into what it actually means for a company to act ethically, to be socially responsible. How does it actually affect decisions?
And maybe look at some of the gray areas too, or it gets tricky.
Exactly. Because it's not just theory. It's about the choices people make every single day in their jobs.
Choices with real consequences.
Definitely. So for you listening, maybe you've faced these kinds of dilemmas yourself at work.
Or maybe you're just wondering why some companies seem to get it right and, well, others really don't.
Or you're just curious about what responsible business actually looks like. This should give you some solid insights, hopefully without the dense academic feel. We're aiming for those aha moments.
Okay, sounds good. So let's start with the basics, some key terms. The chapter defines ethics pretty simply, right? Beliefs about right and wrong, good and bad.
Yeah, specifically in actions that affect other people.
Then business ethics narrows that down. It's about ethical or unethical behaviors by employees, specifically in their jobs.
And it's useful to separate ethical from unethical behavior here. Ethical is, behavior that fits with your own beliefs and what society generally sees as right or good.
While unethical behavior goes against those beliefs, those social norms about what's wrong or bad.
Pretty straightforward on the surface.
So then the chapter brings up managerial ethics. This seems more specific. Standards for managers in their work.
Exactly. It focuses on how managers behave towards specific groups. First, towards their own employees.
Okay, like what?
Things like fairness, respect, dignity, providing a safe workplace, basic stuff, but crucial.
Basic, but as you said, sometimes complex in practice. What does fair mean when resources are tight, for instance?
That's the rub, isn't it? It requires judgment. Then there's responsibility towards the organization itself.
Honesty, integrity, loyalty.
Yep. Not misusing company resources, protecting confidential information, that sort of thing.
And the third area, it mentioned other economic agents.
Right. That's a broad category. Customers, competitors, suppliers, dealers, even unions. It's about ethical conduct in all those external dealings.
So dealing honestly with suppliers, not colluding with competitors, fair treatment of customers.
Precisely. It covers a lot of ground.
Okay, so with all these potential ethical issues managers face, how do they actually figure out the right thing to do? The chapter suggested a kind of process.
Yeah, a three-step model for assessing ethical behavior. Step one, gather the facts, all the relevant information.
Makes sense. You can't make a good decision without knowing what's really happening.
No, absolutely not. Step two is analyzing those facts to figure out which moral values are most important in this specific situation.
So you bring your sense of right and wrong, maybe the company's code of ethics, into it?
Exactly. And then step three is making the actual ethical judgment based on that analysis. Is this proposed action or policy right or wrong?
It provides a structure, at least.
It does. And to help with that analysis step, step two, it introduces 4 ethical norms, kind of like tests.
Okay. What are they?
First is utility. Does the action optimize the benefits for everyone affected? Is it fair and how those benefits are spread?
So the greatest good for the greatest number, essentially.
Kind of, yeah, but with an emphasis on fairness too. The second norm is rights. Does it respect the rights of all the individuals involved?
Like basic human rights, legal rights, that sort of thing.
Hmm. Then third, there's justice. Is the action consistent with what we'd consider fair? Is it impartial?
Avoiding bias, discrimination. Got it.
And the fourth one is caring. Does the action align with people's responsibilities towards each other? Does it show consideration?
Empathy.
Yes. The idea is you check your potential action against all 4. If it passes all tests, it's likely ethical. If it fails one or more.
Then you need to pause and rethink, or at least have a very strong justification.
Exactly. It's a useful framework.
So understanding these ideas is one thing, but how do companies actually make ethics part of their, DNA? How do they formalize it?
Good question. The chapter highlights 2 common approaches. First, adopting written codes of ethics.
Like a formal document laying out the rules and expectations.
Pretty much. Core values, expected conduct. The second is setting up ethics programs.
What does that involve?
Training, yeah, but also maybe ethics outlines, dedicated ethics officers or committees to handle concerns and give guidance. It's about building a supportive culture.
And it mentioned something interesting about how these formal things relate to core principles and values.
Right. The idea is that the core principles, the deep values of the company, they should be pretty stable, unchanging.
While strategies and practices might change often.
Exactly. And organizational objectives change, but maybe less frequently than day-to-day practices. The code of ethics is ideally rooted in those deeper, stable values.
Okay. Now, let's broaden the lens a bit to social responsibility. How's that defined?
The chapter calls it the overall way a business tries to balance its commitments to relevant groups and individuals in its social environment.
So acknowledging it has obligations beyond just making a profit.
Precisely. It's about the wider impact.
And who are these relevant groups and individuals? The term used is stakeholders, right?
Yes, organizational stakeholders, anyone directly affected by the company's practices, so they have a stake in how it performs.
And the main ones listed are customers, employees.
Investors, suppliers, and the local communities where the business operates. Those are usually the big five.
So let's break that down. What does responsibility look like for each group? Customers first.
Primarily, treat them fairly and honestly. Safe products, transparent pricing, honest advertising, no deception.
Seems straightforward, but obviously vital. And for employees.
Fair treatment again, respect for their dignity, basic human needs, safe working conditions. Equal opportunities are a big one to legally required, but also a social responsibility.
And things like work-life balance support, helping them keep skills up to date.
Yeah, increasingly those are seen as part of the responsibility. And even treating people with compassion if they have to be let go.
Okay. What about investors?
Key thing there is transparency and proper financial management, following accounting rules, giving accurate performance info.
And definitely avoiding things like insider trading.
Absolutely. Or misrepresenting the company's financial health. That erodes trust completely.
And suppliers. It mentioned partnership arrangements.
Yeah, the idea is to move beyond just squeezing them for the lowest price, build mutually beneficial, fair relationships.
And finally, local communities. And maybe even international ones.
Involvement. Supporting local programs, charities, contributing positively to the areas where they operate. Being a good neighbor, essentially. The chapter actually goes a bit deeper on responsibility towards customers, mentioning consumerism.
Right, that's social activism focused on protecting consumer rights.
Exactly. And it highlights issues like unfair pricing, collusion, for example.
Where companies secretly agree to fix prices, that's illegal, obviously.
Highly illegal. And price gouging, taking unfair advantage of situations, like jacking up prices insanely before a hurricane.
Yeah, we see that sometimes. So there's a consumer bill of rights.
The chapter lists several key rights. Safe products, the right to be informed, to be heard, to choose.
To be educated about purchases and courteous service, too.
It's a pretty solid foundation for protecting consumers.
Okay, another big area of responsibility mentioned is the environment.
Hugely important now. It covers tackling pollution, air, water, land pollution, dealing with toxic waste properly.
And promoting things like recycling.
Yes, and conservation. This leads into green marketing.
Ah, yes, where companies actively promote their environmental friendliness.
Sort of, but it's meant to be more than just talk. It's about actually modifying production processes to be cleaner, using sustainable materials, designing eco-friendly products, reducing packaging.
The chapter gave examples, right? Ford, GE reducing resource use.
Yeah. SC Johnson's green list for ingredients. VW planting trees for carbon offsets.
Starbucks using recycled fiber cups. Whole Foods focusing on sustainable sourcing.
Exactly. It's becoming much more mainstream, partly driven by consumers, partly by a genuine sense of responsibility.
All this seems to tie into what the chapter calls contemporary social consciousness, this idea of accountability.
Right. There's just a growing expectation now that businesses need to do more than just, not break the law. They need to actively contribute to society's well-being.
Okay, so given that expectation, how do companies actually approach this? The chapter laid out a kind of spectrum of stances.
It did. At the lowest level, you have the obstructionist stance.
Doing as little as possible, maybe even covering things up.
Pretty much. Just denying responsibility. Then moving up, there's the defensive stance.
This is meeting the minimum legal requirements, but nothing more.
Basically, yeah. Doing only what they absolutely have to do by law.
Next up is accommodative.
Right. These companies will do more than the minimum, but usually only if they're asked or pressured to. They'll respond to requests.
So not actively looking for ways to help, but willing if pushed.
Exactly. And then at the top, the highest level, is the proactive stance.
These are the companies that actively seek out opportunities to contribute. They see it as part of their mission.
Yes, they view social responsibility as a positive goal and look for ways to make a real difference.
It's interesting to think about where different companies we know might fall on that spectrum.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The chapter also briefly touches on small businesses.
Right. For them, ethical issues often boil down to the individual ethics of the owner, maybe.
Often, yes. And the big question for social responsibility initiatives is often affordability. Can they dedicate resources to a social agenda when they're just trying to survive?
A fair point. Now, what about the government's role in all this?
Well, a major role is regulation. Setting the laws and rules, environmental standards, labor laws, safety regulations that dictate what businesses can and can't do.
Direct and indirect rules.
But it's the two-way street. Businesses also try to influence government.
Through lobbying.
Lobbying, yes.
Yeah.
Using representatives to influence legislation. And also through political action committees, or PACEs.
Which channel money to political candidates.
Exactly. So there's this constant interaction between business and government shaping the rules of the game.
So, if a company wants to manage its social responsibility efforts well, how does it do that? The chapter mentioned formal and informal dimensions.
Right. On the formal side, there's legal compliance, just following the law.
Yeah.
That's baseline.
Then ethical compliance.
Making sure members of the organization stick to basic ethical standards beyond just the law.
And philanthropic giving. Donating to charities and causes.
Yes, that's another formal dimension, awarding funds or gifts.
And how do they measure if any of this is actually working?
That's where the idea of a corporate social audit comes in. It's a formal, systematic analysis.
Looking at how effectively the company used funds and achieved its stated social responsibility goals.
Exactly. It's a way to evaluate performance and find areas to improve. It brings accountability to the process.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive for you, the listener, we've really covered a lot. From basic definitions of ethics and social responsibility.
To the different stakeholders involved, customers, employees, investors, communities, suppliers.
The different stances companies can take, from obstructionist all the way to proactive.
And that interplay between business and government regulation and influence.
Hopefully, this gives you a much clearer framework for understanding how businesses grapple with these really complex, important issues.
Definitely. And maybe some food for thought as we finish. Thinking about that spectrum of social responsibility stances, what factors do you think really push a company one way or the other? Is it leadership, public pressure, profitability?
Yeah, what makes one company proactive while another stays defensive? And maybe more personally, how can individuals like you listening actually encourage businesses to move towards that more proactive end? How can we influence them?
It's something to ponder as you observe the business world around you. What really drives corporate behavior when it comes to ethics and society?